Hello, everyone. So I know I'm in good company when the evening starts off by celebrating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, probably the most advanced document that we've produced collectively together. So it was just great to do that, and it's great to be in everybody's company tonight. I want to thank Richard, I want to thank Malinda, and Cesar, and everyone, and all of the distinguished award recipients tonight, and everyone who came as well, everyone who's here and who is, just in speaking to people, leading the charge for really progressive issues in their own way. So I was really honored, really grateful to be asked to come and speak. I was particularly grateful because human agenda is part of an emerging 21st century consciousness that looks beyond political ideologies and recognizes that basic human well-being is something that has scientific determinants. It's something empirical. It can be measured. And that's to say that public health is a question of discernible needs. We need clean air. We need water. We need nutritious food, warmth and shelter in the form of clothing, a place to live, a roof over our heads, education as well, to nurture our minds, and time to take care of those things as well. And human well-being is therefore a direct function of society's ability to satisfy those needs. And so the political arguments that we hear are so far from that discussion, those ideologies of the actual determinants of basic human needs that I've heard tonight here, and that I heard Richard speak about in Minneapolis for the first time when I was there for the Democracy Convention. And it's also an understanding that drives the new political party that myself and that tens of thousands of others are working to build right now with Movement for a People's Party. We began as draft Bernie for a People's Party, aiming to get Bernie Sanders to start a new party, and we have since morphed into the Movement for a People's Party because that original campaign inspired so much support and enthusiasm inside the progressive movement. And so tonight, I wanted to try to place our efforts, all of ours, in the context of human history, because in many ways, I think that we find ourselves at a crossroads. The peril of our situation has never been greater, but neither has the opportunity or the promise. We live at this intersection and this crescendo of so many different converging trends and forces in society. Some of them decades and centuries even in the making. For example, since we're in Silicon Valley, there's probably a lot of people who will know about this, but for hundreds of years, the foundation of economics has been an exchange of human labor for wage income. But now, the old 20th century neoliberal model, and even capitalism itself, traditional capitalism, is falling apart as new technological advances in robotics, in artificial intelligence, enable a completely different social order where production and services are performed by machines instead of human beings. And there's numerous studies from Oxford, MIT, that discuss the implications that this is going to have, the profound implications, ranging from about 50% of jobs that will be automated in the next 50 years. And that lends itself to an entirely different system of an entirely different economic system. But at the same time that we're also transforming our climate so drastically that we're exterminating species at the rate of the KT asteroid impact that wiped out the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. Think about that. That's incredible. In fact, the change is so dramatic that geologists are recognizing a new epoch, the Anthropocene. They have had to come up with a different classification because our effects on the environment and the climate are so profound. Meanwhile, we're also confronting the fact that inequality is higher than it was in the Gilded Age. Now, we're going back to medieval times with inequality. And so now we have this incredible phenomenon. You have 5 people who have greater wealth than the bottom 3.5 billion people on Earth. and it's just an astonishing level, greater than times of robber barons and monopolies from the Gilded Age. And in the U.S., a single family owns as much wealth as 43% of the country. That's the Walton family. In my generation, millennials, are the first in living memory that are actually worse off economically than their parents. My generation, young people, actually make 43% less than they did 20 years ago. And that's an incredible drop. So thanks to all of you for that. And meanwhile, at the same time, confidence in bedrock institutions and societies at historic lows. I mean, it's all three branches of government: television, print news, justice system, big business, banks. It really reflects a loss of the consent of the governed. But probably the most concerning, certainly to me, is the development of existentially threatening weapons. So nuclear weapons were the first existentially threatening weapon, weapons that have the ability to actually wipe out humanity as a whole, but they were not the last. Today we're developing technologies that dwarf nuclear weapons in terms of their destructive potential. These are biological weapons, nanotech weapons, and artificial intelligence as well. And these technologies are being developed driven by the profit motive, private profit motive, rather than by public well-being. So for example, in 1945, there's only one country that possessed nuclear weapons. It was the United States. Since then, in the past 70 years, now it is 9 countries that possess nuclear weapons. So there's another several countries that are called paranuclear. They have the ability to produce them very quickly. And nuclear weapons are also much stronger than they were than the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so that lends itself to really a trajectory. When a new existentially threatening weapon is developed, that weapon enters the same trajectory that nuclear weapons enter. And that's to say that over time, it becomes more destructive and it proliferates into more hands. And so you can just imagine, as you play this forward with the addition of several new, even more threatening, existentially threatening technologies, that produces a very dangerous situation for humanity as a whole, very precarious. And when we exist in a society that is founded upon conflict and deprivation, then it dramatically increases the chances that we will have some kind of catastrophe that could potentially wipe humanity out. And this is why the famed cosmologist Carl Sagan wondered aloud whether we would make it through this technological adolescence. So all of that was very bleak. And a bleak future is possible. I don't want to downplay that, but it's not inevitable. And I think that's why we're all here tonight. It's because we know it's not inevitable. We know we can change it. So the same technologies that threaten to wipe us out could also turn this planet essentially into a paradise where all human needs are met. And those technologies, in order to do that, they exist today. They exist right now. There's nothing that needs to be developed. So for example, rather than causing an employment crisis, labor-saving technologies could free human beings from monotonous work and repetitive work. John Maynard Keynes, upon whom much of modern economics is based, predicted in the 30s that by 2000, we would be working 15 hours a week. What happened to that? We could finally realize Franklin Roosevelt's vision of second bill of economic human rights and Martin Luther King's vision of a guaranteed income. That the idea that each person is worth economic survival, and that social and political rights are not the only dimensions of rights, but rather a person who doesn't have access to basic health care, doesn't have access to education, doesn't have access to shelter, that person does not have a very high quality of life themselves, just like they wouldn't if they weren't afforded the vote or if they were discriminated against because of their race or their gender. We could produce energy in a distributed fashion with clean rooftop solar, eliminate fossil fuels. We could have public transport systems that are completely clean. Our vehicles could be powered with electricity, ending millions of tons of pollution annually that are dumped in the atmosphere right now. Cars contribute 50 to 90% of the pollution in cities, and air pollution, all the related health consequences, all of these things being so interrelated. We could produce a global abundance of nutritious food in cities using vertical agriculture, which is soilless. It takes no pesticides, and it would also free up 11% of the land surface of the earth, which is currently used for agriculture. All of that could be freed up. We could produce food at the point of consumption with urban agriculture. So the things that we could do, there are these starkly different futures that really have taken shape. And the things that we do today are the things that are going to determine in which direction we go. As Richard and the other speakers have pointed out, is that the gap in institutions are really, they're gaping. It's the institutions as a whole that need replacing. Jeffrey Sachs, for example, estimates that for just a fraction of the military budget, for $175 billion annually, we could end world poverty and satisfy everyone's basic needs across the planet. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine how much safer that would make the world? How much global conflict that would reduce, how much it would reduce the need to have a military in the first place. In fact, the difference between our potential level of development and our existing level of development has never been greater in human history. The way that we could live and the way that we do, the chasm between that, and I like to think of that gap as political failure. That gap is explained by political failure, where we could be. And it is enormous, it's larger than it has ever been. As you can see by the juxtaposition of those two near futures. So that world is at our fingertips, but building it is going to take a different level of thinking from the kind that brought us here. You know, Einstein said that you can't solve problems at the same level of thinking that created them. And now as Chomsky and Michelle Alexander and Cornel West and so many progressive luminaries are pointing out, the old establishment parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, are simply too entrenched to make that change. And rather, we need thinking proportionate to the scale of the crises that we face. We need a new party, founded, funded, and run by working people. And it turns out that that's exactly what the American people are calling for in record numbers now. So some of you may have seen the polls. Two out of 3 Americans now calling for a major new party. In terms of millennials, it's 71%. Back in 2016, an astonishing 91% of millennials were saying that they wanted a major third-party candidate on the ballot. That's incredible. That's almost unanimous. Another poll, by the way, taken by Harvard a few months ago, asked millennials their opinion of capitalism. Only 18% of millennials called themselves capitalists. That's incredible. And that means that to some extent the political revolution has been won in the hearts and minds of the next generation. But what we face now is we face a conflict between old, established, entrenched institutions that are really gatekeeping that path to the future and that new mentality. And everything that we see in society, you know, Bernie Sanders, whose campaign I was on, all of that, the conflict between those things is the difference between those two ideas. And there's more good news too. And it's that in the past 3 years, new parties in Greece, in Spain, in Chile, most recently, in France, have all broken deeply entrenched two-party systems. These new democratic socialist parties. Parties that dominated their politics for decades at a time have been replaced, have been challenged, taken apart by new progressive parties. In the United States, a new party formed with just half the Democrats and half the independents. Independents, by the way, who far outnumber Democrats and Republicans at this point, at about 42%, compared to about 28% for Democrats and Republicans. New party formed with just half would be about 50% larger than either the Democratic or the Republican parties. And so that's why what we're doing now, and what I hope many will join us in doing, and I really think it's such a collective effort, is we are putting together this coalition of working people, of unions, of communities of color, academics, student groups, of Sanders surrogates, of former Democratic elected officials and party officials who are leaving and who are getting in touch with us and saying, where do I sign up? and facilitating discussions with them, and really being able to put together this coalition that can launch a major party. Because from my perspective now, having done this for about a year, having worked on this, I see that people all over the place are so ready for this. And it's just a question of bringing them together, bringing them to the table, and being able to work off of that and really start that conversation, getting everyone to pool their resources together. There is great basis for that too. As everybody here knows, and everyone, I'm sure, practically everyone here is a big supporter of Bernie Sanders, and there's tremendous unity around progressive issues. For example, 93% of Americans who say that politicians are listening to rich donors and want to get money out of politics. There's about 2 out of 3 who want single payer, 2 out of 3 who want free public college. And so, in short, the majority of Americans are progressive on the issues, and the large majority of Americans are calling for a major new party. And it's a question now of building it, and whether we are up to the task, whether we can assemble that, and whether we really have, I think, the political courage to do something that's than what's been done before. And so I really want to thank everyone here for giving me the platform to talk about that, and everyone here who is working towards those goals in their own way and has been for so many years. I look forward to talking to more of you about that.